What do you do if you're in charge of a television network on the verge of losing its government-insured monopoly? In 1955, BBC faced this problem when ITV launched to give it competition for the first time. Unlike its current leadership, however, then head of programming, or as it was known then, controller of programs, Cecil McGivern not only cared about his network's market share, he had a plan to protect it. In a famous 1954 memo, McGivern had foreseen the coming of competition, noting, "Had competitive television been in existence then, we would have killed it every Saturday night. We're going to need many more Quatermass experiment programs." So, the word having been given, Nigel Neal was again commissioned to write a new adventure for what had become Britain's most famous rocket scientist. Thus, Quatermass 2 was born. This is the second in the Quatermass trilogy. Yeah, I know, it's not officially listed as a trilogy, but there are 3 movies. They're all made by the same studio. They all have the same hero. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and fights aliens like a duck.
Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century!
Like most Hammer movies at the time, the American distributors gave it an alternate title. In this case, Enemy from Space. But we're going to remember it by its original name.
Thus I was able to see the changing world in a series of glimpses.
This movie takes place an undetermined amount of time after the Quatermass experiment, since we saw the second rocket launching over the final credits. We can at least take an educated guess as to the time frame. How long does it take to build your standard 1950s single-stage rocket ship anyway? Oh well. Once again, Nigel Neal's quintessential British scientist is played by painfully American actor Brian Dunleavy. And no, Nigel Neal was still not pleased about it. More on that later. Val Guest is back to direct. What is it with Quatermass movies being so dark? Anyway, a young man and woman, played by Barry Lowe and Jan Holden respectively, are driving breakneck across the English countryside when they damn near run somebody off the road. Turns out that somebody is our favorite British rocket scientist.
What the devil are you playing at? Are you trying to commit suicide or something?
Wow, this guy really does not want to help push the car. Okay, our first jump scare is from the opening credit. Well, there's an encouraging sign. Nigel Neal actually wrote the screenplay this time out. Meanwhile, back at British Rocket Group, wow, I'd forgotten just how primitive the first arcade video game graphics look. We find Quatermass's assistant, Marsh, again played by Brian Forbes, and William Franklin as Bran, tracking meteorite storms. Is Marsh old enough to be smoking? Professor Control Freak storms in and immediately wants to know why they reset the radar dish. After chewing everybody up for more or less no reason, Quatermass apologizes, makes some cryptic comment about everyone losing their jobs, and then explains what's going on to Brand. Seems like they've lost their leverage with Parliament. The new rocket, Q2, has been grounded. There's a very real possibility it'll blow up on launch, which, bad as that is complicated by the fact that its core is an experimental and apparently highly unstable atomic power plant, so everybody's more than just a little hesitant to just push the button and see what happens. Everybody except Quatermass, that is, who's ready to take the chance and wants to send it up. The government overseers at Parliament won't let him. Haven't we been here before?
You deliberately launched that rocket without waiting for official sanction.
If the whole world waited for official sanction, it'd be standing still. You took too long. I made my own decision.
Anyway, Quatermass thinks it's all just so unfair. I mean, just because a few people died, they want to hold back science. By the way, before we go any further, I need to apologize about one thing. It's very difficult to identify some of the minor characters in this movie. They don't use names and are often listed as constable, worker, secretary, etc. I'll try and do the best I can. So, a very distracted Quatermass notes that things are just not going well for the rocket group. To add insult to injury, the bureaucrats have suspended their funding. Time to update the resumes, boys.
Moon Project. May it rest in peace.
Moon Project RIP? Last time we saw these guys, they couldn't keep track of a single rocket with 3 astronauts in it. Now they want to build an entire moon complex?
Still, credit where credit is due. True, Quatermass can't keep track of his rockets and astronauts, but he sure can build one hell of a model. Is that HO scale?
Oh, well, dear. But you were going to be out collecting souls tonight.
I finished early.
Fair enough. So, you want to sit in on the Quatermass 2 review?
Sure.
I felt like saying, find yourself another director for your rocket group. I quit. If I'd had any pride, that's exactly what I would have done.
Dunleavy had any pride, he would have said no and Val Guest called.
Well said.
Listen, Quatermass, give them that story, but don't try it on me. We know that as soon as that thing left the Earth, we'd be stoking up an atomic bomb.
Details, details.
We could send it up without a crew, by remote control.
If you did, you'd never dare bring it back to Earth.
At last, Quatermass finally has an assistant that will not take any crap off of him.
Hey, fun fact. In the miniseries, the young woman working with Quatermass, being played here by Marion Stone, was listed as his daughter, which is actually very relevant to the Quatermass mythos. In this one, she's just listed as yet another secretary.
They probably thought it'd take too long to explain. In this version, her part's almost non-existent anyway. All she does is type and get coffee. Marsh, Brand, and Quatermass discuss the location where the meteorites fell, Winterton Flats, which happens to be the same place the young hit-and-run couple mentioned they were going to picnic. Coincidence much?
Quatermass and Marsh look for the elusive Winterton Flats. They go from what is essentially a hunting trail to a newly paved road. In doing so, they discover a secret government project. Dang, them things are a dime a dozen.
Government property sign.
Maybe we struck a rival project.
Neither Quatermass or Marsh are willing to stop and ask directions. Typical. So, when the road ends abruptly, they decide to backtrack.
And as they drive off, men with guns come out of the forest. I'm sure this is fine.
What happened, sir? Is anything... Oh, no.
The Moon Project.
In what has to be a massive blow to his ego, Quatermass discovers someone has taken his moon base idea and built it for real. Worse, it was built on what appears to be the remains of the flattened Winterton Flats. They also find a number of broken meteorites.
Score! Marsh finds a whole meteorite. He's as excited as a kid in a candy store by this super cool discovery. Right up to the point it explodes in his face. Well, so much for his good looks.
Alarm sirens start sounding from the base, refinery, whatever the hell it is. And as Quatermass tries to assist his injured assistant, he sees armed men surrounding them and closing in.
Seriously, guys? Did your moms make you wear those outfits?
As Quatermass is asking if he knows what the strange rocks are and what they do, he notices that one of the guards has the same strange mark on his face as Marsh. The men, not being in the mood to answer questions, settle for butt-stroking Quatermass. He's then shoved into a car and basically told to piss off.
On the way back, Quatermass sees one of those nifty new post-war prefab suburbs going up and decides to stop for help. He asks where the police station is. Turns out, this little paradise is so special, they don't need law enforcement. The nearest station is in a nearby town about 15 miles away. The woman suggests instead he go to the camp committee.
They take care of everything. At said community center, Quatermass finds a really high-class operation. I mean, they have their own card table and everything.
Hey, wait a minute. If he's the secretary, why is she the one doing all the typing?
So we meet Mr. Dawson, played by Charles Lloyd Pack, and I think his right-hand woman is Betty Impey. Mr. Dawson, however, does not like questions. Frustrated with the lack of help, Quatermass tries to call the police in the next town. Dawson hangs up the phone and tells Quatermass he's wasting his time. The police won't investigate anyway.
Police couldn't do anything?
She's right. They wouldn't touch it.
Deciding that he has the time to waste, Quatermass makes a beeline for the police station in the next town. He meets two officers, played by actors we could not identify, unfortunately. Quatermass quickly realizes that Mr. Dawson was right. Turns out dangerous meteorites and armed goons is a you problem.
Marsh was arrested by guards at a top-secret project Quatermass had no business being around. Well, thank you for a dose of my own medicine. Returning to the rocket group, a shaken Quatermass orders a 24-hour guard be posted on the radar station. He recounts the events of the evening, including the part where Marsh was infected and taken by parties unknown. And they built his moon base behind his back.
You told them all about this?
I told them all they were capable of believing.
Condescending much? Still, it's nice to know his ego is as gargantuan as ever.
The interns, Philip Baird and Robert Rakes, have been busy. It seems they too have a knack for modeling. Quatermass views the cast made of the meteorites, showing what they looked like before they hit the atmosphere.
The original shape is very familiar. Long and thin, With spines for guidance? They were obviously created for a purpose by something intelligent.
The aliens are playing lawn darts with the Earth.
They are interrupted by the radar, which shows the next wave of meteorites descending.
The Big Q goes to London and meets with Inspector Lomax, this time played by John Longdon, along with his Michael Balfour as Harry and his sergeant, played by Arthur Blake, I think. Lomax tries to be gracious, offering Quatermass a cigarette. Hey, at least he's not shaving this time.
When the professor asks about Winterton Flats, Lomax becomes very offended. Obviously, he does know about it, and has been told that asking questions is a no-no. Still, Lomax relents and suggests Quatermass talk to an MP named Broadhead, who has been asking similar questions.
I only know him slightly, Member of Parliament. He's been trying to force a public inquiry about Winterton Flats. Maybe you should talk to him.
Will he tell me what the place is?
It's a government project to make synthetic food.
Synthetic food? With guards and guns?
Hey, KFC is really serious about keeping those 11 herbs and spices secret.
Are you dependable, sir?
What?
Well, Nigel Neal had his doubts.
Yes, he'll be there. Quatermass. That's right.
Yes, the guy that lost the rocket.
Quatermass finds a kindred spirit in Broadhead, played by Tom Chatto, although Broadhead says the facility is not so much sinister as it is a money-wasting boondoggle.
Dude, it's a government project. Tell us something we don't know.
When did all this start? About the time about the time your second rocket failed to perform as expected. After 3 months of trying, Broadhead is getting his pass into the facility and invites Quatermass to be his +1.
It's Mr. Broadhead.
And then there's this asshole.
Said pass is delivered by a very smarmy functionary played by John Van Eysen, we think.
Our smarmy friend just happens to have a very nasty and familiar-looking scar on his wrist. Is it considered foreshadowing that this looks like a funeral procession?
The plant seems oddly deserted. There's no one working outside at all. In fact, we don't see any workers until a whistle blows. It must have been on a union-mandated break.
Noticing a medical center, Quatermass decides to see if Marsh is there. Broadhead comes with. The smarmy guy immediately notices he is missing 2 guests. Marsh is not there, and everyone seems oddly hostile. And apparently they have no patience that they have no patience.
A very annoyed smarmy quickly shows up to corral them,
Gentlemen.
obviously ignoring the lady.
So, the aliens are incels as well as murdering invaders. Good to know.
Every time they ask a question, they get the same response.
But please, everything will be answered later. Everything will be answered later. Later, you will see everything.
Right. Obviously nothing suspicious going on here.
The guests are told they are going down to see where the production happens.
But you'll be taken downstairs.
What, down there?
It's quite safe.
Well, you'll have to go first. I have no head for heights.
Just ignore the men in the protective clothing putting on gas masks.
Hey, I trust him implicitly.
Smarmy says to call it a safety precaution, but for whom exactly? About this time, he notices that Broadhead is missing and immediately locks down the facility, but not before Quatermass can slip out. Letting his mask of congeniality slip, Smarmy seizes the female MP, played by Joyce Adams, and quite forcefully invites her to see the production floor.
Shall we go down?
I don't want to.
I'm afraid we must.
Well, obviously, this guy does not understand that no means no.
Hearing a horrific scream, Quatermass finally spots Broadhead. At least he thinks it's Broadhead.
Wow. Man, I think this is going to take more than a little sawdust and a mop to clean up.
As Quatermass reaches Broadhead, the man collapses, repeatedly screaming for Quatermass to not touch him.
The unfortunate Mr. Broadhead was investigating one of the huge storage domes when he accidentally fell in. Turns out the food is corrosive and actually toxic to humans.
So it's Taco Bell?
Broadhead's grisly death triggers alarms, and the discount wannabe stormtroopers come running.
Trust me, the 501st Legion, these guys are not. So Quatermass plays hide-and-seek with the Walmart brand security troops.
You can't see me. If all else fails, spray and pray. Sure, why not?
Quatermass finds one of the cars that came in and helps himself because, hey, who doesn't want to drive a classic Rolls Royce?
Fortunately for Quatermass, these jokers really do shoot like stormtroopers.
Fortunately for car lovers everywhere, Hammer couldn't afford to wreck a vintage automobile, so Quatermass finds the gate conveniently open for him.
Segue back to the London police station. Enter Jimmy Hall, played by Sidney James. He is desperate to find something to write a column about, even offering booze to the constable, played by Arthur Blake, for a tip.
Quatermass storms in, demanding to speak to Lomax. He starts by asking how much authority the inspector wields. Presser actually wants to know if Lomax could authorize large-scale action. He tells Lomax that all the other people that went on the tour are now infected.
Ew.
Now, look, sir, I'm a pretty ordinary sort of fellow with a pretty ordinary sort of mind.
And, oh yeah, Broadhead is dead.
Lomax is understandably skeptical about the minister's death, especially when the paper lists Broadhead as leaving the country on a trade negotiation. Quatermass wants Lomax to raid the facility, but the inspector, who's interested in keeping his pension, is not really keen on the idea.
Finally convinced that they need to do something, Lomax goes up to speak to the commissioner, who is played by Jon Stewart. Lomax starts to explain the very weird situation when he notices that now familiar mark on the commissioner's hand. The inspector quickly changes the subject and starts backing out.
Meanwhile, Quatermass telephones Brand. Brand tells him that they've traced the meteorite's origins.
It's in a freak orbit on the dark side of the Earth, in a permanent state of eclipse.
Lomax returns and quizzes Quatermass about the infamous mark, demanding he describe it in detail. Having suspicions confirmed, the inspector tells him that he saw a mark just like that on the commissioner. Their discussion is interrupted when Lomax notices his office doorknob being turned slowly.
Both men breathe a sigh of relief when they realize it's ace reporter Jimmy Hall, who immediately has two things to be grateful for. First, Lomax is not a violent man. Second, this is not America, where all the police officers have guns.
Jimmy recognizes Quatermass as the Rocket Man. You know, lost it, found it, crashed it in a field.
Killed 2 astronauts, one turned into a horrifying tentacle monster. Yeah, that guy.
Very annoyed, they throw him out, then suddenly realize they can actually use this clown. The men believe if they can sober Jimmy up, they can bypass all the government secrecy and get the story out.
Quatermass and Lomax take Jimmy back to the rocket base to explain about the impending invasion.
Quatermass also speculates that the little green men are a gestalt creature, all of them sharing a single mind and point of view. You know, like progressive SJWs.
Not life as we know it. They probably have their own artificial atmosphere. Ammonia, methane.
Poison gases.
It comes from a region where such conditions do exist as atmosphere. The outer planets, maybe a moon of Saturn.
I wonder if that point's going to come up again.
So they stole Quatermass's moon base idea as a staging base for the invasion. Yeah, he's still a little miffed about that.
Jimmy wants to talk to the employees, the quote-unquote normal people, before he does anything. Meanwhile, Quatermass is beefing up security while Lomax is making up a list of the people he thinks he can trust to bring into this. The interns have also finished their analysis on the stuff on the boss's coat. Long story short, the aliens hit the trifecta. The stuff is super corrosive, super poisonous, and super icky. Unfortunately, this could mean the end of all life on Earth. Yeah, haven't we been here before?
Stock sci-fi plot number 4. We get back to the community center just in time for the St. Patrick's Night dance. Ah, St. Patrick's Day. Wherever in the world can be Irish. Or at least drink like they are.
Now this is what all community centers need. A full-service cash bar. The barmaid, Sheila, played by Vera Day, brings a drink to Ernie, played by Michael Ripper. Yes, that really is his name. They're treated to some bad dancing by Gorman, played by Percy Herbert, before Sheila shows him how it's done.
Why does everyone here look like someone's aunt or uncle? You know, the one you don't talk about.
Bartender complains that Sheila's not being much help, and she notes that she only has 2 pair of hands. If that's the case, I think we just found at least one alien. Jimmy tries to get information about the plant from the locals. Meanwhile, Dawson spots Quatermass. This is going to be trouble.
Humanity is on the verge of annihilation, but never mind that. Gorman needs to vent about how the townspeople are looked down on by the zombies at the plant. They never speak, and mostly just ignore the locals.
One mention of the guards at the plant almost gets the men thrown out. However, Lomax tries to use his authority to bring some order to the situation.
Oh, he has such a commanding voice.
Quatermass tries to explain that they're all in very real danger, The crowd quickly realizes that, despite their good intentions, these guys are threatening their meal ticket and decide, once again, to throw them out.
They're all stopped in their tracks by a jump scare. One of the meteorites crashes through the ceiling and falls right at a woman's feet. How flattering.
Quatermass says this is a prelude to the invasion. The locals just blow him off, though, calling the fallen rock an overshot, saying, "This happens all the time." Knowing they're in real danger, Quatermass and company try and clear the hall.
Definitely proving that her blonde roots go all the way. Despite Quatermass's warnings, Sheila digs out the meteorite and holds it up to her ear like a seashell. I think you can guess what happens next. Finally listening to reason, Sheila puts the deadly meteorite on the floor. Just in time for it to explode. Oh sure, someone gets infected by a weird space parasite right in front of you. Now you're all willing to take us seriously.
Screw these people! Quatermass and Lomax realize that the meteorites are descending en masse. While this is happening outside, Jimmy stupidly decides to use the phone to call in his story. Seeing that the reporter is about to bring down the aliens on them, Quatermass and Lomax hide. Jimmy is still on the phone talking to his editor when in walk Larry, Moe, and Curly, guns at the ready. They also have a pole with them, with something on it, so they're either here to find the meteorite or fix their cable. Jimmy is spotted, and Jimmy is shot in quick succession.
I think I've been spotted.
Horrified, Quatermass and Lomax hop in a car and book it to the plant. On the way, they see squads of guards searching for the meteorites. This distracts them long enough for Quatermass to accidentally run over one of the guards.
Didn't your mom ever teach you not to play in the street? Well, there go his insurance rates.
Quatermass sends Lomax back to London to get help, while he takes the now-deceased cosplayer's uniform to sneak into the plant. Brave man. I sure wouldn't wear that.
Meanwhile, the villagers decide to do what villagers do best. March up the road en masse with makeshift weapons.
A riot is an ugly thing. And I think that it is just about time that we had one!
Wait, no torches and pitchforks? Come on, guys, this is a Hammer film. Get your act together. The mob see Lomax coming and brilliantly decide to block the road with a wall of human bodies. Geez, are they in luck that he's a police officer, and a conscientious one at that. The villagers decide to take his car, meaning no reinforcements are coming. Yeah, this plan's going well.
Donning the silly helmet, Quatermass infiltrates the plant. Seems the invasion is in full swing, and a loudspeaker announces that the next wave is on the way.
Where are we going? When? Real soon!
Curiosity getting the better of him, Quatermass takes a peek in the observation window. And we get our first look at the Ick Monster. I love this shot. If you look real close, you can actually see Brian Dunleavy reviewing all of the life choices that led him up to this point in his career.
Unfortunately, his odd reaction draws unwanted attention. Everyone there is infected, so disgusting blobby creatures don't bother them. Things look very bad, but Quatermass is saved by the arrival of the villagers attacking the castle the plant's gate. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like that's gonna stop him. Well, actually, on the other hand, it might, since you're driving at walking speed. Who planned this insurrection anyway?
The well-armed aliens are being very tolerant. They haven't opened fire yet, even though the villagers are breaking in.
A mob of angry villagers are assisted by the infected guards, who very nicely open the gate for them. A general melee breaks out, and only then do the guards start shooting.
I don't think this invasion is going to go well. One of the workers just walked up, punched out one of the dollar store action figure guards, took his gun and started mowing them down.
Even Lomax proves he's down for a good old-fashioned scrap. Handily disarming one of the alien guards, he takes a gun and leads a charge into the plant.
The loudspeaker orders the guards to shoot to kill. Fortunately, they still shoot like stormtroopers.
They're just a few feet below you. You have an automatic weapon. You're right there, and you can't hit anyone. Dude, you suck at your job. Lomax and a few of the workers make it into the plant. They're just about to get shot when Dunleavy channels his inner G-Men and mows the guards down from behind.
Our heroes barricade themselves into a control room and find a locker marked emergency weapons.
How convenient.
As luck would have it, along with the weapons, their safe refuge is also the control center for feeding the goo in the domes.
Quatermass looks over the gauges and deduces that the aliens are trying to acclimatize themselves to Earth. He quickly realizes that he can lethally sour that milk by pumping in pure oxygen. Things are looking desperate.
How long before that oxygen takes effect? How can I tell? Maybe hours.
And what then? There'll be others coming.
There will be, unless we can destroy the asteroid, the thing they're coming from. How you doing?
Your emergency plan, what was it?
To use the rocket as a guided atomic bomb.
Happy birthday, you thing from another world, you.
Oh, thank you.
We cut back to the rocket base with the rocket looming in the background. Brand and Peterson argue about using the rocket as a weapon.
Michaels, Brand, check rocket motor set to critical phase. We're launching. Don't argue, do it.
They are about to launch when in walks Marsh, looking suave, debonair, and highly infected. And he brought some friends.
Marsh's Toy Story reject army men shoot Brand as he lunges for the control panel, but he still manages to launch a rocket before collapsing. Marsh and his new friends bugger off. Fortunately for Earth, Quatermass opted not to install the obligatory self-destruct button usually included in these rockets.
Meanwhile, back at the plant, the villagers have found a stash of rifle grenades.
Jackpot.
Being a bit of a pessimist, Quatermass says even those will not help. But one of the villagers has some good news. What the man thought was a flare was the rocket, streaking towards the aliens' asteroid.
2 hours later.
All's quiet on the industrial front. Aliens have not attacked, but the oxygen is not working yet either. Just when everyone is questioning whether Quatermass's plan will work at all, the aliens come over to the loudspeaker and begin begging them to stop pumping in the oxygen. McLeod, played by John Ray, loses his nerve and calls the aliens, offering to surrender. What ensues is a very odd conversation with McLeod talking into the phone and the aliens responding over the loudspeaker.
That's one way to let the audience in on the conversation, I guess.
Quatermass tries to stop him, but Gorman sides with McLeod, and his arguments are backed up by a Tommy gun. McLeod and 2 others, I don't have their names, decide to get out while the getting is good, and they meet the aliens outside. They are immediately marched back to the dome. Quatermass and Lomax tell the remaining men that any minute they'll hear their co-workers telling them everything is okay. Instead, what they hear is the sound of the men screaming through the pipe.
What's that?
Well, I'm convinced. Clearly everything's fine.
They discover one of the pipes above them is cracking. Quatermass notes that pressure is building, meaning the pipe is blocked at the source. Gorman demands to know what it is blocked by, just as blood starts dripping from the crack.
The thing's turned on them. They used them to stop the flow of oxygen. That pipe has been blocked with human pulp. No.
I'm pretty sure that violates the Geneva Conventions.
Gorman and his co-workers do not take the news of their friend's gruesome demise well at all. Good job, guys. They blow up one of the domes, releasing the noxious pseudo-atmosphere over the plant. Fortunately, they are surrounded by dead goons who all happen to be wearing gas masks.
How convenient.
Next comes the grand reveal of the big monster. And I do mean big. Released from the domes, the massive creatures move to strike back at their tormentors.
Gorman uses an anti-tank grenade on the creature. When it strikes, we don't see an explosion. It doesn't even flinch. We can assume the blob just swallowed it with no ill effects. Well, that's disheartening.
Being both a scientist and a rational man, Quatermass deduces that now is the time to get the hell out of Dodge.
Hey, monster's gonna do what a monster's gonna do.
Meanwhile, on a much brighter set, the rejects from the island of misfit toy soldiers haven't gotten the word and are still shooting at our heroes. Guys, I think you have slightly bigger problems at the moment.
Now someone thinks of ramming the gate.
They're in pain. It's driving them mad.
Well, of course they're in pain. They just stubbed their toes and all that industrial crap. Seriously, though, you gotta admit, that's a pretty damn good effect for 1957. Just when it looks like all is lost, we cut to the rocket, proving again that it is always darkest just before the nuclear dawn. While everyone else watches the giant trash heaps drop and become satisfyingly dead, Quatermass orders them to take cover from the imminent nuclear shockwave.
I'm sure they'll be okay. The U.S. Army conducted dozens of nuclear fallout tests in the 50s, and that turned out okay, right?
Why do these movies always end with Quatermass walking down a road somewhere? When Hammer Studios began production of the Quatermass experiment, they were cashing in on a smash hit television serial debuted by the BBC. The bet paid off big time, so much so that when it came time to produce a sequel, Hammer actually had the rights secured for the Quatermass 2 prior to the BBC airing the new serial. So, spoiler warnings, I guess. As I said before, Nigel Neal was given the opportunity to pen the initial screenplay. However, Val Guest once again took on the job of condensing the script for the big screen. Guest had great respect for Neal the storyteller, but, as he would later admit during interviews about the project, Nigel Neal was a very cerebral, long-form storyteller whose style perfectly matched the serial nature of the BBC television. Unfortunately, it was at odds with the tight constraints of motion picture. Guest had to trim the story without ripping the heart out of the narrative, and in this, he was surprisingly successful. What we lost were largely contextual scenes and small world-building moments and characters. For example, while she was only on screen for a moment in the film, Paula Quatermass's role was significantly larger in the serial. In the serial, Paula was depicted as being a scientist in her own right and a contributing member of the rocket group staff, much like Judith Caroon before her. When Quatermass attends hearings on the mysterious Winterden Flats facility, it was Paula that accompanied Quatermass to the hearings. So the next time someone tells you there was no representation until they showed up, feel free to tell them what hole they can blow that out of. Additionally, in the serial, the initial meteor falls were witnessed by a British Army radar station. The officer assigned to investigate was Paula's fiancé, so that's how Quatermass becomes involved. We also get a larger window into the rocket group's problems. It had been previously established in the Quatermass experiment serial. The main experimental launch base was sited in the Australian outback. While the movie gives us a brief conversation between Brandt and the Q-Man about their new rocket's problems, the serial goes into greater depth. Turns out during a ground test of the sister ship of the rocket we see on screen, the nuclear engine went out of control and detonated, destroying the base and killing several hundred people. Needless to say, Parliament killed their funding along with any active planning for the moon base we hear about in the movie. So Quatermass has more than enough on his plate when his future son-in-law asks him to investigate Winterden Flats. On the film side, one scene that originally did survive from the serial to the movie involved the guards at the plant confronting and ruthlessly gunning down a family picnicking on the site. The British Film Board thought it was too violent for moviegoers and had Guest pull it from the film. Also, Vinnie Broadhead's part in the movie was greatly expanded from the serial. Originally, Broadhead was simply a sympathetic ear in Parliament. However, when Quatermass sees him next, Broadhead bears the infectious mark and now claims there's no problems whatsoever with the plan. So much for politicians. The only other major change was the ending, where in the serial, Quatermass ends up piloting the rocket to the asteroid as some kind of weird Doctor Who-like chase scene from the aliens, survives his colleague trying to kill him, and ends up using a nuclear engine to blow up said aliens. Val Guest settled on the much simpler tactic of simply nuking the shit out of the asteroid. More on that in a minute. Now everybody knows how rough I've been on Brian Dunleavy's portrayal of Quatermass, and with good reason.
You took too long. I made my own decision.
Do you receive me?
You mean I can't stop you?
That's right. Don't argue with me. I know what I'm doing. I think I can save you a lot of time, Inspector, with your so-called investigation.
By the second movie, however, he seems to have a reasonable handle on the character. It was the serial that had the real problems in this regard. Back during the casting of the Quatermass experiment, producers had wanted Andre Morel to play the temperamental genius, but Morel reportedly wanted nothing to do with the project. So, director Rudolph Cartier went with his second choice, Reginald Tate. The rest, as they say, is TV history. Unfortunately, less than a month before Quatermass 2 was scheduled to begin filming, Tate succumbed to a fatal heart attack. The role was again offered to Andre Morel, who now very much was interested in playing the part, because hey, who doesn't like a hit? Unfortunately, Morel was obligated to several other projects at the time and couldn't make room in his schedule, so the producers moved on to their third choice, John Robinson. Now, Robinson wasn't a bad choice. He was an experienced actor with credits under his name stretching back into the 1930s. The problem was the timing. Reportedly, John Robinson was unsure how he was going to take over from Reginald Tate, the man who had made the role iconic. Robinson also famously struggled trying to learn all the technical dialogue in the script in the short time he had before filming. Hugh Laurie reportedly faced the same challenge in every episode of House. Not only was he required to speak complicated medical terms correctly in the correct context, he also had to sound like he knew what he was talking about. The last part was apparently where Robinson's portrayal fell down. Then there was Paula Quatermass herself, Monica Gray. The actress chosen to portray her was apparently forced on the production staff by BBC management. She was the wife of the then head of BBC radio drama. I'm sure she was a very nice person, however, as one reviewer put it, she was less an actress than a finishing school on legs, so yeah. Several of the supporting characters in the film got a complete makeover from their serial counterparts. As much as Sid James' portrayal of ace reporter Jimmy Hall added to the movie, the character was a little different on TV. Now personally, and speaking merely for myself and a small army of classic Whovians, I wouldn't have minded seeing Roger Delgado on the big screen, but the serial character was apparently written exceptionally dry and businesslike, which is a real shame because everyone who knew the man said Roger Delgado was an absolute mad lad at heart. As I said before, the last major change between the serial and the movie came, appropriately enough, at the end. In the serial, Quatermass and one of his staff actually pilot the rocket to the asteroid, even though they do acknowledge that Quatermass was too old to make the trip, presumably because they couldn't guarantee his survival. Of course, on the flip side, if he doesn't go, the whole world gets taken over, so Quatermass manages to land on the asteroid, which proves to be a colossally terrible idea. What follows is basically a Doctor Who chase scene 8 years before the unearthly child was even conceived of. In one very clever twist, however, Quatermass's companion is possessed by the aliens and attempts to kill the Q-Man. But instead, we get to see what happens when you fire a bullet, an explosive chemical propellant, in space. Nice knowing you, pal. Quatermass then uncouples the atomic drive section of the rocket, essentially dropping an A-bomb on the aliens. In the movie version, Val Guest wisely chose to simply nuke the asteroid remotely.
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Critics regard Quatermass 2 as the weakest of the three movies, but I'm not so sure I agree. Q2, in both the series and the movie, did a lot of things right. The series was the first of its kind to rely heavily on location filming, something modern shows now do as a matter of course. For the film, Val Guest just returned to the same location, namely the Shell Haven oil refinery. However, this afforded him a wealth of varying camera angles and creative cinematography. We can feel the oppressive nature of the facility as our heroes march toward the monstrous, overshadowing central dome. The absolute lack of population also adds to the surreal nature of the place. This is something that the serial achieved well. What let the TV version of the story down were apparently the unfortunate low-quality effects the BBC was stuck with, due in equal parts to the time constraints of live filming, the reduced TV budget, and 1950s television effects in general. The final episode reportedly suffered badly because of all of this. But the film also had its issues, and one of them was the direct result of Hammer's notoriously constricting budgets. Jack Warner, who portrayed Inspector Lomax in the Quatermass experiment, was already a well-known and popular actor at the time of filming. Thus, when shooting budgets were being drawn up for Quatermass 2, Guest was told he'd had to find another actor. Jack Warner cost too much. Personally, this one kind of stings to me because even though John Longdon turns in a very serviceable performance as everyone's favorite Scotland Yard civil servant, I miss Jack Warner in this role. I also said earlier that Brian Dunleavy seemed to have a better handle on Quatermass's character this time around. I believe we have the script to thank for that. Dunleavy had a long career in Hollywood, mostly playing villains, so his brusque, self-important, almost bullying portrayal in the first film was a natural extension for Quatermass, who had all the cards and all the authority under his control. In Quatermass 2, however, the Q-Man is most definitely not in control. Indeed, he's completely out of his element and spends most of the picture just trying to comprehend what's going on around him. I think this role reversal serves Dunleavy very well. He comes off less as the pompous authority figure and more the sympathetic man swept along by circumstance. Quatermass knows there's a threat, he knows he has to stop it, but he's uncertain how or even what he's dealing with. Again, I like this portrayal better than the Quatermass experiment, but that's just me. In perhaps the final and greatest irony, Quatermass was not the only one trying to figure out what he was seeing. Turns out one of the greatest critics of the Quatermass 2 serial was the man who championed it initially, Cecil McGivern. McGivern was apparently underwhelmed by the final product Rudolph Cartier and Nigel Neal created, judging it inferior to the prior Quatermass experiment. However, not so much that he didn't greenlight the third and final Quatermass serial. I mean, hey, ratings are ratings, right? Over the years, the subjects first broached in Quatermass 2 have become sci-fi and movie tropes. Government cover-ups and national secrecy balanced against national security, the destruction of an established culture in favor of a new, invasive, and predatory culture. Why does that last one sound so familiar? So the next time you watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers or The Manchurian Candidate, remember, it all started in a field in Britain in 1957 with an unknown meteor shower and a confused rocket scientist who couldn't remember his technical jargon. I'd like to thank Reaper Mom for sitting in on the review tonight.
It's been fun. I really enjoyed helping with the review. If you don't mind, I would love to pop in for Quatermass in the Pit. It's one of my all-time favorite Hammer movies.
You guys be careful out there. You don't want to meet me in person.
Thank you, dear. I'm the Hammerson, and that's what I remember.
Go. Go now.